Good evening, everyone. My name is Paul Young. I'm just going to do a quick video on the retail sector in Canada. So basically, like a lot of organizations in Canada, there's certain specific groups that oversee kind of the lobbying or kind of just working with groups on public policy and just supporting them as kind of like a membership. So retail sector in Canada employs about 806,000 Canadians. And a good portion of those Canadians are basically students. It also represents large and small type of retail outlets, so it's a significant contributor to the economy. Now, retail sales itself, like anything else, if you look at GDP growth, they're a big portion of GDP along with exports. So you really have to keep things in perspective in terms of the value of retail sales. It's also extremely competitive in terms of pricing, cost, and it's also driven a lot of cases on resale goods because most of the stuff we bring in now is imported from China, which means it's going to be subjected to currency rates, duties, excise taxes, and all that, depending on the goods and services that are being offered. So you need to factor that into play, and that also is driven by government policies through trade agreements, investment agreements with countries as part of looking at the old tariff and trade situation. But in general, retail sales are about 500 billion now, and of that, it's growing between about 2% to 2.5% a year. Now, e-commerce is a growing business in Canada. A lot of you probably deal with the Amazons of the world, Best Buy. Most retail companies, stores, especially the large store chains, have some sort of e-commerce site or capabilities. Now, in Canada's case, it's been slow in terms of adoption, but a lot of that has to do with the geographic issues with Canada. We are pretty much geographically challenged. We have some areas in Ontario and Quebec where we have urbanized areas that are close together, but a lot of cases we've got a lot of rural areas, so it's hard to kind of leverage that. But basically, it's becoming more and more important to retail stores to have the right strategy on e-commerce. And the reason I say that is, like anything else, you're going to hear about cap and trade all the time. Well, cap and trade or any sort of carbon pricing will impact retail because retail relies on logistics. Logistics are usually driven by vehicles. Those vehicles are usually powered by carbon, so that's oil and gas, diesel, right? So if you're going to impose cap and trade or any sort of carbon taxing or emission controls, then it's going to force up the cost. If you don't believe me, you can go take a look at what's happened out in BC. They brought in cap and trade, and guess what's happened to their pricing? Their pricing's gone through the roof up there. Let's talk about retail sales itself. By the time we get to 2022, in about 7 years, retail sales will be about 13% of the total sales for retail business in Canada. So you can see significantly what's happening there. Now, what that means is the store operations will adjust to that. So if you're going from basically tripling or quadrupling your sales, e-commerce sales, you're not going to need the staff in the store. So you're going to see a reduction potentially in the retail stores because it's being transitioned. You're going to see more and more happen with supply chain management, and there's different things that'll happen part of that cycle. Some of it may come from the stores itself through warehouse distribution center. Some of it may be just drop shipment. And what a drop shipment means is it basically means the retail store works with the supplier and the supplier delivers it directly. So you'll see more and more of that take off. You also might see different things like combined sites where retailers use sites on the internet to kind of leverage cost as part of the overall e-commerce and flow. I just used the US online sales for a reason here. They've adopted it quicker, but geographically they're not as challenged as Canada is, so that's why it ticks us. Same with the UK. Now, government policies are going to drive cost in retailers really watch their costs because their margins are pretty slim at times, especially when you get to the small type of stores because they don't have the overhead and they don't have the cash, so they have to watch their costs. So any sort of new cost increases, paperwork, red tape, taxation issues will impact small business and will impact hiring. the ORPP is listed here because the Retail Council of Canada has said they're against any sort of payroll tax hike because it'll hurt them big time, and yet the governments don't seem to want to listen to that. Now, the reason I brought that up is both the NDP and the Liberal government are looking at CPP enhancements. Now, nowhere in their so-called platforms or the other statements are there. The reason why is because CPP goes into a dedicated fund, so it goes into part of a retirement fund. However, it's a cost for business. So you need to put everything on the table when you're starting to talk about cost of business. It's easy just to put it under the radar screen because it's attacking business, but in essence it's still going to attack business, and that impacts investment. That investment impacts job creation. Now this just gives you an idea of the cost. Okay, if you look at lighting and hydro costs and HVAC and all that, that's significant cost of a business. In Ontario's case, rates have gone up significantly, and this kind of shows you the estimated cost per square footage for a small store. Now, wages, we all know that retail typically pays minimum wage, but that being said, it also employs the bulk of them are typically students, right? So when you're talking to the election, or you're just reviewing policy, what you should be asking yourself, and to be clear and succinct, is you need to really kind of take a step back and really ask questions here. The policies being proposed by the Liberal Party and the NDP are doing nothing more than adding more cost to business. And when you add cost to business, it's not just one cost, it's all the other policy proposal. It's shock. And if business is in for a shock, it will respond accordingly. And typically what that does for a business, it calls back its investment, and it also looks at how it wants to control its costs by reducing hours or reducing headcount. Those are the facts. I can sugarcoat it all you want, but the reality is business will respond accordingly if their conditions are changed dramatically on policy. The last thing this country needs is to go through radical change on policy just to support agendas, and whether that's Agenda 21 or other sort of agendas in terms of putting more money into social programs. You know, the whole idea with any economy, what drives it, is private sector. You don't have the government drive the economy, the private sector drives the economy. Problem is when you deal with the NDP and Liberal, they want the government to drive the economy, and that doesn't work. Thank you.